every moment when there was an opportunity to discuss Janelle and whether she would be found alive, he would say, no, she is not going to be found, from outbursts in church to elsewhere. So it's going to be an interesting back and forth. I mean, I really like these cold cases because, like you said, I mean, they could really go either way. There's circumstantial. I mean, here we have a body. Obviously, we didn't have Kathy Durst's body. But I think the prosecution does have enough here, but I like what the defense is doing here, saying, like, this is someone who's just strange, someone who's just obsessed with these cold cases, true crimes, as you like to say, and someone who's not a murderer.
He did this. He had a note about the fact the snow outside of the Matthews house was raked. On the other hand, the defense may argue, so what? He was looking at all this information in the newspapers. He was putting it all together. He likes to follow these investigations. Which one wins the day?
Well, it's early in the case, but I like what the prosecution is doing. They're showing someone who isn't just strange, someone that has an obsession with young girls, that would sit outside and watch them walk to and from school. But on the defense side, I really like what they've done. They focused on the lack of a struggle. And obviously, Janelle didn't know Pankey. She wouldn't have gone willingly. So, and they have another potential suspect that, and so it's always good when the defense has its own theory of the case. And, Norris Drake, whose mom lived very close to Janelle. I like what the defense is going there. Obviously, it's pretty early in the trial, and we'll see what evidence the prosecution continues to put forward. But I'm especially looking forward to hearing about those admissions from Pankey, particularly at his son's funeral, where he says, is this happening because of what I did to Janelle?
Right. Absolutely. I agree. And all those things that he said, we know the exception to hearsay is it was said by the defendant, said by the parties. So generally, I expect we're going to be hearing that. You hear the prosecution's argument. You hear the defense's argument. We just listen to it. Defense says, let him out on his own recognizance. He's not going anywhere. And the prosecution says, let's do a $200,000 bond with some other conditions. And the judge, and I've done this before, says, nope, I'm worried about his safety. I don't think it's safe for him or society that he be released today. Do you think this was a surprise to both the defense and the prosecutor?
Not a surprise, though. I'm not surprised that the defense is obviously going to ask for a signature bond or for their client to be released. But ultimately, if you're the prosecution, this is someone you need detained. And I always like drawing parallels between cases, but actually you and I know the worst thing you can do, and I know they're just allegations here, as an attorney, is steal from your client. And not only is Murdaugh alleged to have stolen here, but more than $3 million from the sons of the deceased here, their former housekeepers. So, I mean, this is something that causes you to lose your license, get disbarred, not to mention that he's caught up in another alleged insurance fraud scam relating to the death of his wife and his son. So there's a lot going on here. He's admittedly in rehab for substance abuse. So when you're analyzing those two factors, risk of flight and danger to the community, which every bond hearing does, it really weighs in favor of detention here.
Bail that you give the money, and then if you choose not to come to court, you lose that money. Talk to us, if you would, about what bond means.
Sure. Bond is, so bail is usually just an amount of money. Bond tends to, you have either signators or, you can put up personal property as collateral to ensure your appearances at trial. Ultimately, that's what this is all about, regardless of whether it's a bail or bond system. Its purpose is to ensure the defendant comes to court. So oftentimes, when it's a serious case, there'll be a presumption of no bail or bond, or if and when a defendant is convicted at jury trial, even if there is bail or bond, that is revoked because the risk of flight increases dramatically once a defendant has been convicted. Going back to the bondsman issue, I mean, that's a huge industry, and they usually charge about 5 to 10% industry standard of any bail amount. But ultimately, the Murdaughs, reminds me of sort of a Chad and Lori Daybell. Obviously, not everyone ends up dead, but they're involved in a lot. That DUI boating accident, multiple folks that are dead, allegations of misappropriating client funds and other types of fraud. So, and these are individuals that are, involved in the legal community, very prominent family out there in South Carolina, many of whom have been prosecutors. So that's the last thing you want if you're an attorney, especially when you're supposed to be enforcing the law and you're serving in positions of public trust. So not a good look for the Murdaugh.
They are going to get the records from the drug rehabilitation centers, send those to a psychiatrist to then write a report to prepare it and send it to the judge. Do you think that that will be enough to satisfy the judge?
Probably not. I mean, let's not forget that Murdaugh was arrested when he was leaving rehab for drug-related reasons. And there's just so much smoke here and so much in terms of the missing funds. We're talking about millions of dollars. And the prosecution nailed him. This is someone with significant means, someone that has every reason to 3.4 million reasons not to show up to court. And that's just what he's been charged with so far. Obviously, law enforcement is still investigating all these other cases. So, I mean, I think that would be the first step. But ultimately, this is someone who I think is going to be in custody until he faces trial.
All right. And I think, Neama, you're a regular guest on my show. I love having you, but I just am going to predict that at some point in these future shows, we're going to continue talking about this case as it continues to unfold. It's being bootstrapped because of all of the associations that this defendant in this particular case has with a lot of dead victims and money. So he walked in on his wife and son who had been shot to death. His housekeeper, we know, died allegedly from tripping, but that was his narrative that was given as to what happened to her. We know that he's being investigated for a 2015 hit and run to see if he had any involvement. We know that he's been shot in the head. When you put all these things together, do you think keeping him in jail is a direct result because he hasn't been charged with any of those, but you have to wonder if it's coincidence that all these things have happened in his life?
I mean, Ashley, you nailed it. And also what Renee said, judges are people, and there is a lot of attention on this case. Obviously, we're covering it here on Court TV. This isn't your run-of-the-mill fraud or embezzlement case. And there's a lot going on here. I mean, going through, we know that his wife and his son were murdered. Obviously, he hasn't been charged yet, but he's the one that found the bodies. We know that he was involved in a DUI boating accident. With respect to this particular case, the embezzlement case, the stealing client funds, I mean, he allegedly colluded. I mean, he's the defendant in the case. I mean, the housekeeper tripped and fell on his property. He allegedly colluded with the living heirs, the sons, to find them an attorney to sue his insurance company. So, and then when they did, he misappropriated the funds. I don't know how he got them from plaintiff's counsel into his trust account. So, I mean, there's so much going on here, and there's so many eyes on this case. You would expect the judge here to be more cautious, not to mention what defense counsel raised. A long history of opioid addiction, a failed suicide attempt. There's just too much going on right now to release Murdaugh on bond.
You have to give him bond. You have to let him out unless he's a threat to other people. So in that case, do you agree, Neama, that he be left where he is for the time being?
Well, I think he should remain in custody, but Renee raised a good point. I mean, you're talking about the victims of crime, and victims of crime have rights in every state under Marcy's law or similar law. And here, there has been no conviction, so ultimately those rights usually attach after a conviction at the end of the trial. You don't see victims of crime addressing the court on bail or bond issues, so that's certainly something unique. And one thing I do have to disagree with is, I know financial crimes are important, theft of money, using a pen, as Sutterfield's attorney mentioned. It's not the same for bond purposes because you're talking about danger to the community. It's a different kind of danger when someone walks in using a weapon. But from an attorney perspective, this is something that's very serious. And we've seen it recently. We're talking about other cases, but here in my hometown of Los Angeles, Michael and Avenatti is being charged by federal prosecutors here for similar conduct. Obviously, Tom Girardi, one of the preeminent plaintiff's attorneys in the country, real fall from grace, stealing client funds. So this is very serious in the attorney world and the judicial world. So I understand why the victim's attorney was hammering that and focusing on that issue, because that's something that's going to offend anyone who's practicing law, particularly a judge.
You're right, absolutely. And Neama, you make such a great point.
I mean, here you have an ex-wife, so I'm sure on cross-examination, she is going to be asked about their separation and divorce. Does she have an axe to grind? But I agree with you. She came across as very likable, very credible, and On the other side, Pankey, is he someone that the jury's gonna like? Is this someone who's quirky, a busybody that gets into other folks' business, like the defense said? Or is this a controlling ex-husband, someone who's potentially violent, like the state is trying to show?